Oh, she's got such a nice voice, that lady.
Do I have to hit
Well,
the got
good
it here?
morning, Barry Flemming in Vancouver, Port Coquitlam. And I'm Doug Miller here in Montreal with Ken Lukart in Toronto. Today is Wednesday, the 13th of July, 2022. And we're going to talk to Barry Flemming about his experiences with respect to the anti-apartheid movement and the involvement of the union. Barry, but first, welcome, Barry. Nice to see you again after such a long time. And I just want to make sure that you realize that we're doing this as part of an anti-apartheid activist history project, and that it's being recorded and will be archived for people to use in the future for research, for broadcast purposes, for educational purposes. Do you agree to that kind of interview?
Do.
Okay, excellent. Barry, we go back a long way, but at the same time, we haven't been together for a very, very long time. So how about giving us a little bit of your background, first with anti-apartheid, because I know before you joined the union, you also had some more experience and background in that field. How did you get introduced to the issues around apartheid back in that time? And could you give us some dates and where you came from and when you did all that?
Sure. So my first job was teaching in Toronto, in Scarborough. And I left after a couple of years because it was, you had to do Europe in the 60s, right? So I left regretfully, actually. I loved the kids, but I wanted to go. So I spent a year traveling around. The only part of Africa that I touched was Egypt, but the extreme poverty, et cetera, made a mark on me. And in those days, poverty was virtually everywhere in Southern Europe, in Turkey, where I was. I was traveling part of the time with my great bud, Mike Beliveau, whose name may be familiar to you. He was with the Fishermen's Union back east, died some years back. And so the poverty made a huge impression on me because, I was one of those products of Catholic school, some wonderful priests. I know that that's not an adjective that is much in use these days, but Father David Bauer was one of my first influences. You'll know him from his hockey days and so on. Anyway, when I came back, I determined that I was going to try to get a job doing something about mitigating poverty. And OXFAM was advertising for an executive assistant, I think it was. I applied, got the job. So began working, and OXFAM was pretty new then to Canada. I think they'd only come to Canada in the early 60s, and we're now in 67. So through that work, I'm exposed to all kinds of stuff that's going on in the third world as we knew it then. And I wasn't a radical, though, at that point. I was bleeding heart, essentially. I hired a guy called David Cayley, whose name probably is familiar to you from his CBC work doing documentaries. And David was a radical, apparently. He'd served already with CUSO in Sarawak, I think he'd been in Sabah, Sarawak. And he began the process of making me see that, there was more at work here than just, the unfortunates who were hungry and so on. And I started my own reading then. And I guess the first experience of really heavy anti-apartheid stuff was David and I put on a teach-in, excuse me, And I believe we called it the liberation of Southern Africa. And that was around 69. The boss was away. The boss was Henry Fletcher. Don't know if his name is familiar to you. Archetypal uh, British, you know, not a colonialist. He was way better than that, but, you know, archetypal sort of British charity guy. And he was away, and we did this. We drew up a poster. We had AKs on it.
Oh, boy.
It was pretty heavy duty at the time. We had, I believe, John Saul speaking, Stephen Lewis, Jerry Kaplan. I mean, we had some
Oh, man.
heavies. Yeah, it was a big deal. And when Henry came back, he was furious. Led to meetings of the executive, led to David being fired because they knew he was the the heavier of the radicals, and I quit in solidarity with David, and that's how I ended up with CUSO.
Okay.
So
And
so
what
that
did you
was
do first with CUSO?
I was with OXFAM for 3 years. And at the end, I was the youth and education director, and we were doing good stuff. We were writing educational sheets for the schools and covering the territory, you know, health, education, and so on. And these were going out all over Ontario. I wished I had kept some. Unfortunately, they're lost in the passage. So anyway, that was in some ways, that was my most consequential involvement with the anti-apartheid, just because of the scope of it and its consequences, led to real shift in my own life and David's. So, yeah.
So then you joined CUSO. This is now around 1970, is it?
It's 1970. As Lawrence Cumming has explained to me, I got hired there essentially because of Suzanne Johnson. I'm assuming all these names are familiar to
Oh,
you.
Suzanne was a neighbor of mine in the glebe.
There you go. Okay. So Suzanne apparently gave Lawrence a big recommendation, and Lawrence hired me as assistant director, East and Central Africa. And but my intent was always to go overseas because I'd been dealing with these issues abstractly, and I wanted to be on the ground. So I was presented ultimately with a choice between Papua New Guinea and Zambia. And of course, I chose Zambia. And lo and behold, who am I working with? Mr. Southern Africa himself, David Beer.
Mm-hmm.
So off I went to Zambia, that 1971. There you go. And
1971 then.
Pardon me, 71. Yeah. So David and I, started working together, very, very beautiful relationship, which we still endures. And my exposure, of course, then to the reality on the ground began. And after one trip to Dar es Salaam, I was smitten. So I lobbied, and when Wayne Mullins was leaving, I moved over to Dar. And while in Dar, tried quite hard to establish a decent relationship with Frelimo. And we actually did a few projects with Frelimo. Chisano, Joaquin Chisano was the rep then.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't know at the time, although I should have been able to deduce it, was that he was just a tad suspicious of us, me in particular, I think, because Tim Broadhead, an old bud from CUSO, had a relationship with the International University Exchange Fund, Lars
Oh boy.
Gunnar Eriksson.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, we know that.
So, yeah. So because of that, I was in the habit of stopping in Geneva and meeting Lars on the way, on a couple of trips home. Well, Chisano knew about this, and I became, I guess, tainted by that. I wouldn't call it a relationship, but even just being exposed to Lars Gunnar. I knew nothing, of course, about his involvement with UNITA and so on. But anyway, it was enough that Chisano, I wanted to go, of course, to the Frelimo had a training ground outside Dar, and I wanted to go there and see how it functioned, and with a view to providing support to it. We had, as you recall, Doug, sort of access to small funds, right?
Yes, exactly.
And while Chisano kept promising to take me, it didn't happen. And so that was a big disappointment.
Can
Now,
I take you
sorry.
back one step, Barry? So
Yep.
you were 1 year in Zambia only?
Only 1 year in Zambia.
Did you meet anybody in the movements at that point and get involved
Well,
with?
yeah, yes, I did. Edward Ndlovu was David's, good friend, and I don't know if he was married to Mary. Yeah, at the time, I can't recall that, but I met Eddie. He became a bud as well, and yeah, I mean that was part of the education, and of course, Dennis September was, I think I overlapped with Dennis, right? And now Dennis, it's just nothing, just a story, if you'll forgive me. Dennis, while being this heavy duty radical in terms of the movement, denied me his house when he was leaving because I was living with a woman that I wasn't married to.
Oh boy.
And so, I mean, it just pissed me off because, it became a struggle then to find a place to live. But that's neither here nor there, I guess.
That's
But,
really strange.
the
Anyway.
contradictions abound, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, and of course, I learned from Dennis. It was fruitful on a personal level and in terms of the struggle.
Was he himself a member of the ANC?
I believe that he was. He was always, let's say, careful about, letting you know too much. But I know that there were comings and goings of comrades that Dennis would see. Sometimes we'd be allowed to meet them, other times no. So
I would
yeah.
vouch for that description based on what I knew and had experience with the September family in Canada, in Winnipeg, I believe. Yeah, that's a very accurate description.
Okay.
Cautious, very cautious.
Yeah. So now subsequently, Jacques Roy, does that name ring a bell?
My goodness gracious, from the Angola MPLA and the
There you go. Yeah.
Zones
Yeah.
Libérées, Quebec, Angola. Oh boy, did he get
Oh
sued.
man, now that guy was a piece of work, eh? I mean, an interesting guy, but oh my God. So he was in Dar, or he came to Dar, in and out. And I can't remember whether I met MPLA guys with him, because he was another guy who wanted you to know only this piece of, what he was involved with. And he subsequently scorched me and Dave in a book that he wrote, calling us both sort of, sort of white liberals. And he was harder on Dave than me, even. I was surprised, but it was crazy because Jacques regarded himself basically as the only the only white person who had a real relationship with the liberation movement.
Yeah.
So, but through Jacques, I did fund a project with MPLA. I think we provided him with money for camera equipment, etc. He wanted to make films that he could use as educational aids back in Canada. I never saw any of those films, but you know, I know I'm sure that they were made. He was serious about his liberation work, but a
Oh,
difficult
yeah,
guy too.
he did make
Yeah.
the films. At least I saw one of them. In
You did, eh?
that period,
Yeah.
72 to 75, when I was in Ottawa.
Yeah, yeah. He so I don't recall the money, but as you know, we didn't, it might have been $500, which, you know, maybe at the time was decent money. We also funded a Frelimo, at least one Frelimo project. And it was, I thought it was bizarre, but you know, that's what they wanted. So that's what we gave them. They wanted watches for their guys inside. Now, I guess, you know, in a sense, it makes sense if you're going to coordinate things and meet and stuff like that. People needed timepieces, and I guess they didn't have them. I don't know. I would have been much happier providing something a little more, you know, with a little more resonance. But you know, he asked for watches, so that's what we gave him. Well, we gave him money. So that and of course Dar es Salaam was a hotbed, eh? You know, it was alive. You know, you felt the engagement of that country with the struggle. You felt it every day, and the paper was always full, and you know, things were called what they were. You know, the Americans weren't the liberators of Vietnam; they were puppets, and you know, so on. So it was great, and so I loved Dar es Salaam. I just loved it with a passion. So I was there for 3 years, and essentially left. Well, and of course, I didn't mention, you know, there were fascinating people there. More deeply involved, John Loxley, Bill Luttrell, some of these other guys. They had things going on that I knew nothing about. John once asked me for money. He said, "Barry, I can't tell you what it's for, but you know, it's for good work." And I gave him personal money, of course, not CUSO money, but these were terrific guys, and as I say, deeply involved. I left Dar reluctantly because I guess I realized that while this was the point of the spear, the essence of if South Africa was going to be truly liberated, the work had to be back in Canada in terms of trade relationships, diplomatic relationships, the kind of pressure that a first world country, as you know, as we use the term then, could put upon other countries, etc. And I determined to go back and sort of do my work in Canada as opposed to Africa.
So this is 1975 now.
This is 1975. And I also realized that I was pretty deficient in understanding what shall we say, the intellectual dimensions of the work. My first degree was in English and Latin, so I went back to and did a master's in public administration. And there was beautiful. I was exposed to Leo Panich, and who became a friend, and Donald Swartz, who became a friend, and became involved with the Ottawa Committee for Labor Action through them. Yeah. And then upon graduation, was able to get a job with the union, which was in some ways a big surprise because, having no union background, I got a job as executive assistant to the management committee. So,
And this is with the PSAC, the Public Service
this is
Alliance.
with the Alliance, Public Service Alliance. The Alliance at the time certainly had no formal relationship with anything to do with developing countries. And by now I'm involved with OXFAM at the level of, I can't remember, whether I got into OXFAM in 78 or 79, but certainly around that time, at the same time that I was with PSAC, I was on the board of Ontario and on the national board of OXFAM.
Now this would
with
be
Mayor,
quite a different Oxfam from the 60s. The one.
quite a different Oxfam. I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, Brownstone was the chair, and I became the chair of the Ontario board, and we had good staff and so on. But anyway, so I had this one foot still very much in Africa, and then one foot in the labor movement. These feet didn't always march in lockstep, but I tried. I mean, I nibbled at PSAC because of the Oxfam involvement. People would say, so-and-so is coming to town. Do you think you could get him a meeting, with some of the heavies in the union? And so, there was a bit of that. I don't remember much of it, but I know that it went on. And I'd write occasionally to the board and say, what about this? What about that? For example, when Jean-Claude Perrault went to, I think it was Central America, and he came back a changed man in terms of international awareness and a desire to get his union involved in assisting that struggle. And I spoke to Andy Stewart, who was then the president of the Alliance, and said, Jean-Claude, and this is what happened. You need to go. Now, whether it was that or something else, but Andy did subsequently go to some countries in South America, and I prepared sort of country overviews for him, each of the countries that he was going to, what was going on, et cetera, who the movements were, and so on. As much as I knew, I wasn't any kind of expert on Latin America. So, specifically to South Africa, it was nibbles, right? As you saw when the SOC2 rep came, I don't know, it was Ken who contacted me directly, but was able to get him to see Pierre, and subsequently, I believe we gave some money to SOC2, which it sounds it's ridiculous, but for the Alliance at the time, it was movement, right? And that movement really did start to roll, as subsequent presidents came in with a bit more of a world perspective. So maybe I can pause there.
Sure.
Talking.
Ken, do you have any recollection of SOC2's early relations with PSAC and Barry?
Let me pick it up a bit. I maybe throw in some material there. First of all, that was fascinating, Barry. I appreciate that history. I didn't know you in those days, but I think I relate to most of what you said there. My first trip to Dar es Salaam, I had the same impression of it being such an active political place. what struck me most is you pick up a newspaper, it talks about the racist regime. You don't talk about the government of South Africa. It's a racist regime.
Yes.
So I've always used that example when I was teaching in university back here in Canada. You know, people aren't calling it what it should be. And that's
Yes.
still the case. You know, when you talk about Palestine, when you talk about Latin America, when you talk about the US, you know, nobody uses the word fascism. So there are things that I recall from those days. And I was there in the 70s with Brenda. And our first connection, I think, with the PA Public Service Alliance was in the early 80s. And it wasn't, at that time, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the Public Service Alliance wasn't considered to be the most left-wing union in the country by any means. So, you know, we thought it important to get the public sector unions on side, just as we had Bob White, and CAW, then UAW. But so it was very important for us to establish a relationship with the Alliance. And it was in the early 80s, 82 or 83, when Zola Zembe came on his second trip to Canada from the executive of SAC2 based in London. And we got him into one of your conventions, and he addressed the convention and met with Pierre Samson. And on the basis of that initial contact, you're right, there was a donation of $1,000 to the SAC2 Strike Fund, which again was used for more than watches, I can assure you.
I hope so.
It may have included watches, but I don't know. That was really important. And from our own archives, we have mention of a meeting that I think I did with the human rights component of the Alliance. And I can't remember names, but there is reference to the Public Service Alliance Canada human rights component. Now, whether that was an amalgam from different other components, I'm not quite sure I remember, but we did have those kind of educationals. And on the basis of that, of course, like in all of our work, we would find more individuals who were willing to take it back to their own locals or back to their own communities. So people like Ken Clavet, Baglow, people those are names that come back to me, but
yes,
it was very important for us to establish the public sector. And Jean-Claude Perrault, of course, was on side immediately. And I had not heard about that trip to Central America that he made, but that probably had a lot to do with his willingness to support SAC2 and the South African struggles.
right.
So those are my
right.
early recollections. And I think, you know, it just moved on over the years. And we got stronger and we got more support and we got more research based on the work that Ken Trainer had done on the sanctions front, all the trade connections, all the investments and all the military collaboration. So those are the early years of our work. I'll leave it at that.
What about CUPE? Did you have any inroads with CUPE?
Yes, CUPE came on board very strongly. In fact, of all of the local unions or union organizations that contributed to the strike fund over all those years, CUPE locals were at the top of the list in terms of the number of CUPE locals.
Right.
That was because of people like, you know, Jane Stinson and Gil Levine and people,
Gil
you know,
Levine,
activists in
Larry
the
Katz,
Larry Katz, sure, all those people. So CUPE was a very strong supporter. And CUPE, you know, it's always uneven in a national organization like that. Some pockets are better than others. Some geographies are more active than others. That's true in any national union. So yeah. CUPE was very much.
Yeah.
Barry,
CUPE,
did in fact PSAC have sort of a social justice or human rights component when you got there?
No, there was. I mean, I don't want to be unfair to the union, but I'm no.
So this was just an absence because the union is spending its time looking after its union members. How do you see international solidarity becoming part of the agenda at that point in PSAC?
Well, bits and, you know, as I say, just, you know, steps at a time. So each little bit, you know, if you could get like Pierre to have one meeting, then he becomes more open to other meetings. And, you know, if you can get them to give 1,000, then the next time they'll think they're going to up the ante. And of course, you know, the involvement with PSAC's involvement with the larger union movement, because CLC had its International Affairs Department. Now, Harker was nobody's idea of a radical, right? But Purett got in there, Paul, and you know, I mean, I think he pushed open some doors, and Grace Hartman, who was the other woman who was the head of the Congress, became. I mean, Paul was able to work her, you know, to get more involved.
Mhm.
So,
Barry,
you know, I mean, it was an evolution. Sorry.
Barry, one of the issues that comes up in all these interviews with people like yourself is that we were operating in the height of the Cold War. So when you're talking about the CLC International Affairs Department, you will recall we had major problems with not just Harker, but with the whole political edifice of international trade union work. So SAC2 was initially, Harker didn't have a problem with us, but as soon as he was told by Brussels that he should have a problem with us, then he had a problem with us, which meant
Yes.
that we had a problem with a lot of the affiliates of the CLC. We had to work our way through a pretty sticky political mess on many occasions,
Yeah.
especially at CLC functions. But we did that. And I guess the question I would have is, was the PSAC leadership influenced by the Harker CLC International Affairs Department direction quite a bit?
Oh, undoubtedly, because they would not have had the sophistication to. I mean, it is the case, is it not, that Harker and maybe even Purett himself sort of didn't get on side with SAC2.
Absolutely. Both
Okay.
of them. I'm not
Okay.
going to make a distinction.
So my memory there is correct.
You're
All right.
absolutely correct. And that became a serious problem, especially with Purett. And Harker, we knew who he was. Purett, they hired Purett because they thought he would be able to help reduce our effectiveness.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, that's my interpretation. I think Doug would agree.
Oh, yes, of
Oh.
course.
Because, you know, we were out distancing the CLC in terms of fundraising, in terms of resolutions, in terms of even actions at the workplace. So
Okay.
Harker was unable to stop that. And people like Bob White, Jean-Claude Perrault, and others were on Harker's ass all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And so they needed a different approach. And so they found Purett to be that other approach. And Purett, coming out of the anti-communism of Ticklesack, which was there, let's be honest, that became a bit of an anti-SAC2 tenor as well.
Okay.
So it's complicated, but that's what the
Yeah.
Cold War produced. I mean, I think it was the best of times, not the worst of times, because it forced us to be very sharp politically.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Well, and of course, what's his face? Gallagher was a really good friend of Purett, and Gallagher had a sort of ambivalent relationship to the struggle as well.
Yes.
I don't know his position on SAC2, but anyway. So Doug, yeah, it was, you know, it was trickle, and,
Sure.
you know, and subsequently became a little bit of a stream and so on. And when Steve Jelly became the assistant to the management committee, and you know, and Steve either lived with Jeff or they were very close buds. Jelly was, you know, Jelly had good politics, and he kept banging away as well, and became a point of access for visiting firemen, as it were.
You're
That's- well,
absolutely. I had forgotten Steve Jelly altogether until you just mentioned him. So he was very important. He became a very important contact for us because he was, as you say, very close to Bickerton, and you know,
Yeah.
became part of an Ottawa initiative on our part. And thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ken Clavette, how would you relate to the local leadership from the national headquarters and would they be pushing you to, pushing, not you, but the PAC to move forward a little on these issues?
You know what, I don't remember whether, it was a very very centrist organization.
Ah.
They would not be pushed by the District Labor Council, but the District Labor Council was a really active in Ottawa. I mean, ACLA, the Committee for Labor Action. I mean, which was very, very left, right? There were a lot of heavy duty rads in ACLA. We had nothing but respect for what the District Labor Council was trying to do. And there were things that we would do together, demonstrations, etc. A lot of stuff going on. Central America, as you recall, was really hot at the time as well. And because of its because of the closeness to us in geographical terms, a lot of energy went in that direction, more so than to Southern Africa. But yeah, a lot of good people, just knocking on the door. And
yeah, I think
lots of-
Ken, that, if I remember correctly, was probably more helpful to us as the president of the Labor Council
yes,
and as an activist within the alliance, because he could facilitate a lot of things that a member can't do within his own organization, but he could do a lot as a labor council.
right. You could skirt the bosses, right?
Yeah.
And go straight to the locals.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and he did that. Yeah. Now it's interesting, Ken, that you mentioned Brussels, because I had a couple of years in Geneva with the PSI, and the ICFTU, that's a whole other beast, right?
I imagine.
But
Holy-
interestingly enough, I mean, like the COSATU used to come to the meetings in Brussels, and I met those guys. I met Ramaphosa and who was the other leading light in COSATU?
Yeah.
Jay Naidu?
Jay
Jay
Naidu.
Naidu, yes, yeah, and a few of those dudes who were, I mean, they'd come to the meetings, all in black leather and scowl at everybody, scare the shit out of them, and get whatever they wanted, which was probably money, and then take off. PSI was a whole other story that it's not pertinent to this discussion, but certainly it was fascinating to see how how the money went and who the players were and stuff like that.
So this is really the Cold War,
Yes, headquarters.
spies versus spies, straight out of Mad Magazine.
I just gotta ask Ken, is the WFTU still in action?
Not to my knowledge. I've been disconnected for quite a while, but I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay, because that was the other pole, of course.
Yeah, of
you
course.
know. Yeah. So
But I think what really upset the CLC, I think it was 1986 when Jay Naidu spoke to the CLC convention and made it very clear at the end of his speech that there was no conflict between COSATU and SACTU, that they were doing different things but with the same objective. And so that kind of put Harker on the back seat for sure, because he and Pierre both had been stirring the pot that SACTU didn't really exist. The claims of underground work didn't exist. And here comes Naidu at their invitation, who says just the opposite.
Good. Yeah.
So Barry, this is quite a varied and long career, and reflecting back on it, how do you feel it went overall with, do you think it helped move Canada forward a bit towards more progressive policies, or helped develop the struggle further? Well,
I think I played my modest part for sure. I think particularly with Oxfam, we pushed it. We, that whole thing about you stretch the elastic and, I mean, that teach-in, while it, it sort of kind of blew things up in a sense, they were never able to just go back to being, a non-player in terms of Southern Africa. There were members of the board who were quite progressive and unhappy to see David and I leave. Mac Freeman, I recall, was with the churches. There was another wonderful old guy who was with the United Church, I think, and they weren't radicals, but they were sympathetic, shall we say, at the very least. I mean, they understood the human rights dimension of the thing, if they didn't understand the whole sort of political development of it.
Well, Oxfam must have evolved fast after that, because by 74, 75, Judith Marshall's the full-time Southern Africa rep.
There you go. Yeah. And the board, the board that I subsequently joined was very, very progressive, with Mayor and many others, and Michael. I mean, one interesting little sidebar. While we're on the board, Michael's on staff, Michael Murphy, and they unionize. So who ends up negotiating with them? Me. And Michael and I are buds. I mean, Michael, I think, was staying at my house while we were theoretically negotiating the agreement. So if we're going to talk about contradictions, there's one.
That sounds like a sweetheart deal to me.
Oh my goodness. What do you want, Mike? Okay, granted. Although I don't think that's how he remembers it. I think he remembers I was a pain in his ass, but anyway.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, any other angles we should be looking at here?
Only I think you should be writing your memoirs and put this in.
Yes.
I mean,
It's a tremendous story, Barry.
Be nice to put that stuff in.
Oh, my memory. I've told my own kids, keep a diary, just even if it's just a couple of notes at the end of the day, you will be so happy to go back and revisit this stuff, because all you'll remember is the broad brush strokes. You will not, the flavor will be gone. It'll just be the event.
That's why this project has been so gratifying to all of us who were involved with SAC2 work, because we're pulling together people and memories and written documentation that we had literally forgotten about.
There you go.
Jane Armstrong in particular has been very good at pulling together archival material, getting it approved by the Labor Archives Canada, and now all these interviews are being added to that as well. So,
right. Oh, that's a great idea. Some of my buds from PSAC are doing something similar with the Labor History Project in Ottawa. Bob Allen, a few guys like that. I don't, probably Rosemary Warscott, who were also, really good people in the PSAC who had very arm's length involvement with the stuff we're talking about, but they could be relied on for donations and organizing and stuff like that. Yeah.
Now, Barry, if Jane were on the call right now, she would ask you a question. The question is, do you know if the Public Service Alliance has archives that we could look to find any of the documentation of solidarity with SAC2?
Yes, I would say yeah. I would say yes, not because I know, but because my strong suspicion would be that
who would we contact in doing that?
The contact for that would be Jelly.
Okay.
He would know, and if he didn't know, he'd know who would know.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you have a coordinate of a phone number or an email for him, could you send it to me?
Okay. I can get it, Doug. I don't have it. Steve and I, we were buds, but like loose buds.
Sure, sure. Well, we've already made one deposit to Library and Archives Canada, and that included all of the newsletters from SACTU, those famous yellow and black things from that era, and
Yeah.
and they are extremely interested in these oral histories. They think this is one of the more valuable parts of it, to hear these stories told from this perspective,
Right.
So anything we can do to get pictures, background, documents, whatever, that's always more grist for the mill.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think at this point, Barry, I'm going to formally thank you, and I can turn off the recording and we can just chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Be
Okay, Ken,
delighted.
anything else on the?
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity to see you again, hear these old stories. It's great.
Thank you, brother. And my regards to Brenda.
Well, we're no longer together. We've been separated now for many years, but
But you're buds.
she's a
You're
part of
still
this.
buds.
Sorry?
Yeah. You're still buds.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And she's
And
a
I
part of
too
it.
want to thank you, Barry. What a great pleasure to see you again after such a long, long time, and to catch the story. Now you filled in all sorts of parts of the puzzle that I didn't have before. So great storytelling. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.